Hi, my dearest family. Today we are going to be looking at the upcoming triple conjunction. Look at what's going on here. We've got Saturn, Mars, and Mercury triple conjunction. All three of them are on 7 degrees. Now, the Saturn-Mars conjunction is going to be forming first. And then Mars is going to start separating from Saturn, and then Mercury is going to run into that triple conjunction. So I'm going to be making this video in two parts. Here, I'm just going to give you general information, and in the second part of the video, I'm going to be breaking this down for all 12 signs. I'm going to be leaving you a couple of days to digest this information because there is a lot to talk about it. So this is a triple conjunction taking place on the 19th of April. Mercury is on 705, Mars is on 750 and 751, and of course Saturn is on 751 as well, all in Aries. Obviously, we've got a lot of planetary energy happening in the sign of Aries. You see there's 6 planets, and we have got a couple of other asteroids involved as well. So with Mercury, Mars, and Saturn all compressed within less than a degree of each other in Aries, we are kind of like looking at a really high pressure bottleneck of energy here. Aries wants to go fast, but Saturn is pulling the handbrake, while Mercury is trying to figure out the map. So it really feels like, on one hand, it's definitely telling us to think before we leap. It's a bit of a stress test here. Mercury is our speech, our thoughts. Mars represents our action. So together usually mean fast talk, impulsive decision, a bit of a cut tongue. However, with Saturn exactly conjunct Mars, that impulsivity hits a brick wall. So, for example, you might feel a desperate urge to send an angry email or launch a project immediately, but an external technical delay or the red tape, Saturn, an authority figure pretty much stops you. So, this is forcing you to be patient. It's actually preventing you from making a mistake. So, therefore, this energy is super good for precision work rather than speed. It's a lot of fire, but Saturn is trying to control this fire. It's kind of like a bit of a laser beam. So Mars and Saturn together are often described as driving with the brakes on, which sounds frustrating, but it's actually how you create a blowtorch. So instead of scattering his energies, this conjunction allows for discipline in a short burst. It's the perfect time to tackle a difficult, boring task that requires physical or even mental endurance, like doing taxation or deep cleaning or even some type of technical editing because we have got Mercury right there. Mercury meeting Saturn creates a no-nonsense mental atmosphere. So conversations during this window will likely be brief, blunt, very focused on facts. It kind of says, I don't need the fluff here. If you need to set a firm boundary or make a final decision on a project, the Aries courage combined with that Saturnian authority makes your words carry very significant weight. However, there's a conflict here because Mars is part of it. The conflict could be high ambitions versus a bit of a reality check. The danger here is that words that cut like a knife, leading to long-term consequences. We can be kind of like screaming on top of our lungs, but we might be paying the price for it for the next 2 years. Saturn and Mars are meeting up every 2 years. But I think this triple conjunction is asking us to have a strategic alliance or a strategic movement. It says, don't just run, build the infrastructure first. Kind of like fill up the gaps on the road so that you can drive that car fast and then you are not going to be breaking down, basically. You know, it's an immovable object. That's what Saturn represents. And Mars is kind of like the unstoppable force. And they are both in a dead heat. In Aries, Saturn actually has the harder job keeping Mars in check because Saturn is in fall position and Mars is in rulership. So, by the way, this conjunction between Saturn and Mars happening on Cancer Dwad. What's very interesting is that Mercury is on Gemini Dwad still. Well, for a couple of seconds, because after obviously Mercury is going to be moving into Cancerian Dwad as well. So the Dwads are a 2.3 subdivision of the sign, and they are kind of like operating within different inner agendas. The Dwads are representation of your inner agendas. So Mercury being on Gemini Dwarf, it says we need to gather information before we talk. And it also says we have to be flexible. However, Mars and Saturn being on Cancerian dwarfs, Mars is in a very protective mode here on those degrees. It says I have to defend no matter what, and I also have to act on my gut feelings. Now, Saturn being on Cancerian dwarf as well, it says we need to establish long-term safety. We need to protect ourselves first, our emotional world, basically. So because Mars and Saturn are in Cancerian dwarfs, that aggressive drive of Aries is really redirected towards the home, the country, the hearth. Imagine this as an emotional self-protection. So this Mars is not just about I want to win. It says I need to secure my foundation. While Mercury in the Gemini world is trying to be light, clever, sometimes witty as well, it's trying to multitask. However, the Mars Saturn weight in Cancer makes this atmosphere very heavy and very sensitive. So that's the reason why this triple conjunction can be super dangerous because we are acting out of feeling, but in an aggressive way. And that would be a lot of Aries energy. So we can expect a lot of drama going down potentially in the next 2 years. I mean, imagine that you might try to have a quick logical business discussion, for example. That's Mercury in Aries on Gemini Dwad. But quickly turns into this heavy conversation about loyalty or family or the future of the country, as well as long-term security. So Mercury is a bit of an outsider here in this conjunction, really, because Mercury is on its own elemental dwad. That's an air dwad. And Mercury is the most objective of this trio. It feels like it, even in the sign of Aries. So Mercury wants to move fast, it wants to keep things intellectual, but it is reporting to a Saturn-Mars pair that is deeply focused on those emotional boundaries and a bit of a cautious consolidation. So therefore, the information is being filtered through this defense department. Imagine that, we have got a governmental kind of like meeting, and someone is trying to warn someone about the consequences, but kind of like this admiral is not listening to that because it's acting on emotions. Maybe people may say one thing logically, but act based on a deep-seated need for safety or just a fear of vulnerability. So, what's very interesting is that definitely Mercury is hyperactive. It's a very hyperactive mind. It's seeking many options. It is using the fast-paced communication. While Mars and Saturn is that extreme discipline applied to emotional security. I would imagine that Saturn Mars in Aries on Cancer Dwad is like the iron wall. So the other thing, let's talk about this Saturn-Mars cycle because obviously Saturn and Mars are kind of like the big guns here, really. So this is the engine versus the brake cycle. Why the Sun-Moon cycle governs our internal rhythm, the Mars-Saturn cycle governs our output, our productivity, our endurance. Now, these two planets are meeting every 2 years, and it marks the start of a new chapter in how we apply effort and handle resistance as well at the same time. So, if Mars is the gasoline and Saturn is the engine block, their conjunction is the moment the engine is tuned, really. I mean, Mars is desire, it's raw, it's impulsive, it's the warrior spirit. While Saturn is trying to limit that, it gives a time frame. It is asking Mars to be more disciplined. Saturn is kind of like an architect. So for me, this cycle represents the maturation of ambition. It turns that temporary push into more of a permanent structure. Saturn is trying to tell Mars that you cannot achieve everything with a blink of an eye. You have to be super consistent about it. So you might start a project that is physically exhausting. There is no luck involved here, that's for sure. It's pure grinding effort. So the Saturn Mars cycle rewards the person who shows up every day, not the person who is just inspired. And Mars got really inspired beforehand because it went into a meeting room with Neptune. And Neptune is the planet of vision. And it potentially started acting on something kind of like driving the car really fast in a very foggy, misty environment. Or maybe you feel this desperate need to move forward, but you are blocked by a boss or a law or even lack of resources. That's Saturn. So this forces you to get creative and find a more efficient, disciplined way to operate. Mars represents aggression, and Saturn is trying to control that aggression. Think of a professional athlete or even a surgeon. They must be aggressive, they must be decisive, but with absolute precision. There is zero room for error. That's what Saturn says. So this cycle is really about becoming a pro at something. Now, because it's a conjunction, imagine this as a new beginning, a new cycle. The cycle between them two, well, I do have some slides on this that I can show you. So here are some previous cycles. So you can see that they are meeting approximately every 25 months. So 2004 May, 2006 June, 2008 July, 2010 July, 2012 August, and so forth. And what's very interesting about their conjunction is that they are meeting approximately 22 to 27 degree apart from each other. So meaning that if we have got this conjunction happening now on 7 degree, then the next conjunction is going to be somewhere between 22 to 27 degree later. So that would be something to do with 29 Aries to approximately about 6 degree of Taurus. Okay, so there is a bigger cycle connected to Saturn and Mars, but I'm not going to be talking about that right now. So this is a conjunction where we are basically starting fresh. This is where we are planting the seeds. This is where the hard work begins. A new responsibility is taken on. And then when they are going to be squaring each other, that's going to be the first crisis. That's going to be a friction when you hit the first major wall. And your methods are being tested, basically. The opposition is going to talk to us about a peak. So you're going to start seeing the results of what got initiated around the 20th of April, or you face an external opponent or even an obstacle. And then we're going to have the last square between them two, which is a final adjustment. That's a bit of a cleanup. You realize what is no longer working and you begin to wind down the effort. Now, of course, we can be looking at these dates as well when they are going to be happening. So if you have got a solar fire, then the way you can do that is you can go on this little tab and then you go on in aspect and then you are just going to be choosing the planets. So you are choosing Mars and then you can go on, for example, square and then you are going to be choosing Saturn. Here you go. And I'm just going to replace that. And I'm going to delete that one. And then I'm just gonna put 2025, for example, here. And I'm just gonna put 2029 there. Okay, so then it's going to start listing you the dates. So you will see, for example, that the next square is going to happen 1st of September 2026. And we're going to have a square 2027, December 22nd as well. Okay, so you might want to be marking these down, but especially you might want to be marking down the very first square, obviously, when Mars is going to be in the sign of Cancer, and that's going to be happening on 13 degree. This is going to be a very important period here because you see Mars on 13 degree, Saturn is on 13 degree, Jupiter is on 13 degree as well. So the Jupiter and Saturn trine are going to be highly dependent on whether it's a super success or not, on what you have initiated right now in the sign of Aries. But more about that later on. Okay, so I hope everyone is pretty much following so far. Now I'm just gonna go back to the previous chart so that you can see what exactly happens there. And I'm just gonna put it on 19th, when actually the triple conjunction is happening. So I hope that this kind of like four major phases of this is actually understandable for everyone. Now, the reason why this conjunction is super unique is because Mars is in its home sign. So this Mars is super powerful, but Saturn is in fall. So Saturn is struggling here. So the impulse to act is massive, but the wisdom to control it's super weak. So therefore, imagine this cycle as you are trying to learn to drive a Ferrari on an icy road. The power is there, but if you don't use the Saturnian brakes correctly, you will spin out. You're gonna break that car. That's the super big danger around this conjunction. And to discipline the will and manifest desires, it should happen through persistence. Maybe it's kind of like hard work is the shortcut. However, positively speaking, this is about strategic action, immense endurance, professional mastery, and negative ways, it's about frustration, repressed anger, hitting a brick wall, and pretty much certain type of a burnout. So, it really feels like on a mundane level. Um, Mars and Saturn in Aries is like a war room meeting. Aries represents the head, the pioneer, the military. Saturn represents the state and the infrastructure with Mercury, and Mercury represents the logistics. So I am wondering if it's going to be kind of like an iron shield, a military precision. It's about fortifying borders. I think you can expect major announcements regarding national defense, infrastructure, smart borders. Since it's in Cancer Dwad, the focus is on protection of the homeland. So we may see countries closing borders more tightly or investing heavily into security systems. Mercury suggests that the war of words or high-tech propaganda accompanying these physical maneuvers. I can imagine logistic bottlenecks or something to do with cybersecurity as well. Remember, Saturn is the brake, Mars is the heat, and it often indicates to certain type of technical failures in very vital systems. So I can imagine delays in global shipping due to maybe new regulations or state-imposed restrictions as well. With Mercury involved, this could manifest as in something like a standoff in the digital world as well. So think of a government level firewall. Saturn in Aries is really about firewall being attacked or upgraded in response to a threat, which is Mars. I can also imagine that a head of the state or the head of a state is going to be kind of like under fire. So maybe it's someone, a leader, who is forced to make extremely difficult, even unpopular, maybe necessary executive decisions. So I think we are going to see a world leader take a very aggressive stance that can feel really cold. This is not necessarily a diplomatic position. It's kind of like giving ultimatums to someone. But because Saturn is in fall, these leaders may act out of fear or appearing weak. And it's a bit of a heavy-handed governing style, really. On a positive note, Mars Saturn is really the master builder. So it might be a major breakthrough in some engine technology, steel production, energy infrastructure as well. Aries is the first fire, Saturn is the container. So I can imagine a new type of reactor, massive construction project that might be kind of speeding up something that previously stalled, for example. Um, from an economical point of view, I can imagine technical glitches in the market, for example. Now, a couple of other things that might be worth mentioning. Um, What really comes to my mind is that, oh yeah, the sun is on 29 degree as well. Well, with the exact conjunction, the sun is going to be on 29.52. So that's an analytic degree. That's a dramatic degree. So that's why I'm expecting some drama to go down with this. The sun is kind of like trying to hand over the keys to Taurus, while the Mercury, Mars, Saturn engine is still firing at full blast, really in early degrees of Aries. So therefore, yeah, all I want to say is that sun really feels like that this is going to be somehow a dramatic type of position. But other things that comes with the Saturn-Mars cycle is extreme pressure, structural failure, kind of like the superhuman discipline as well. So we might be expecting heat waves or very severe weather issues. In Aries, which is a fire sign, this is kind of like the bottled up heat. So sudden spikes in temperature or atmospheric pressure that the current infrastructure cannot handle, basically. I can imagine power cuts or lack of energy supplies. Saturn rules the grid and the supply, while Mars is the consumption. So, this is a classic signature for a system overload where the demand exceeds the capacity, which capacity is Saturn and the demand is Mars. Even Saturn-Mars cycles represents Botox. So Mars rules the muscles and the expression, Saturn rules the freezings and the toxins as well. Aries rules the face. So if someone might decide with this that especially if you've got, let's say, Venus in the sign of Aries on 7 degree, you might decide that, oh yeah, you want to be getting certain type of procedures done involving your face or your head. But I definitely imagine some fight with the government or an attack on an authority figure as well. But with Mercury being part of it, it's really much about heated boardroom battles. It's not necessarily just a physical fight, it's kind of like a verbal assault on someone. Or Saturn in Aries is in its force, so the law might be applied poorly or with brute force, with Mars being there. It's kind of like when the police stripping things bare. So a very aggressive form of justice that lacks the deliberation of Saturn there. You know, However, psychologically speaking, this is about suppressed rage and bitterness as well. Just imagine when you put the brake on a Ferrari, right? So, therefore, it often represents lack of vitality due to stress. The engine is it's kind of revving there, but the car isn't moving. So, it's an internal overheat. That's the depression, really. I can even imagine with Mercury there, which is going to be a representation of an end of an agreement. This is a kind of like a sharp final cut, someone. There's no negotiation here. It's a termination of a contractual agreement. Mars and Saturn together is really like a workhorse as well, though. Often it represents manual labor or even mining as well. So that could really talk to us about the superhuman effort. Is the energy of a person who has to break through, the rock to get to the goal. And obviously that's super tiring as well. Even Saturn-Mars can represent like boxing or the test of strength. It's a bit of a controlled violence. So let's say you want to start a strict routine. This is the best use of this energy, turning that internal suppressed rage into a very physical discipline. So that is also something to mention about this conjunction. Now, I'm just going to put the very last slide on the screen so you can see exactly what this cycle might be talking about. With Saturn and Mars, often we are attacking the frame of the politics. And also, it could really talk to us about an attack against a politician as well. But with Mercury, potentially it might be a younger one. Saturn Mars can talk to us about dental work. Obviously, for example, if it happens in your sixth house, but also, it could really talk to us about muscle pain and soreness as well, for example, in that sixth house. So, you're going to have to look at where actually this conjunction is taking place. But, like I said, I'm going to be breaking this down for all 12 signs. We are going to be doing it in a very, very unique way. We are going to be doing that through the rulership principle. And therefore, I'm going to be coming up pretty much with 6 scenarios for each sign. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, you might want to do that. With Saturn and Mars, I think the key is, in a very positive way, choose something that you would like to put your energy into. It's the combination of a long distance runner. And the long distance runner, the marathon runner is gonna get to the end. But you're gonna have to do a lot of planning for that. So guys, I hope this video helps you and see you very soon with the part 2 of this conjunction. Take care. Bye bye.